Welcome, everyone. Welcome. What a beautiful day here in Bristol, anyway. I'm Luke, the founder of PropFlow. We're a platform that makes it easier for businesses to engage their customers in green home upgrades whilst creating an additional income stream. And today I'm joined by an awesome panel of industry experts representing lenders, brokers, and lettings agents. So first, this is actually a really timely event as Ed Miliband has started to give us a few more clues about the government's intentions on minimum energy efficiency standards. But first, I'm going to run through a few slides to give you an overview of the context and what we know so far about the standards. I'll then introduce Angharad, Sam, and Amanda to get their initial thoughts, and then move on to a Q&A. So firstly, what's driving the energy efficiency agenda? For the UK to meet its legally binding net zero target by 2050, we need to decarbonise our housing stock, which accounts for around 20% of our carbon emissions. To achieve this, we need to invest 250 billion over the next 26 years. And the private rented sector's share of this is around 38 billion. And that means most UK homes are in scope, of which 2.6 million private rented properties are currently below a C rating. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge facing us. But we're nowhere near doing enough upgrades. 80,000 retrofits are needed per month to meet our targets, but we're currently only doing around 17,000 per month. So the Labour government has made making the UK a green energy superpower one of its 5 priority missions. And an important strand of this is energy efficiency, which they're calling warmer homes. They have pledged an additional 6.6 billion of funding to upgrade 5 million homes over the course of this Parliament, and this would likely be in the form of grants and low interest loans, probably delivered via regional and local authorities. But they understand government can't finance everything, so they will be working with the private sector, including banks, to provide further financing for those 20 million properties. So what did the previous proposals say around minimum energy efficiency standards? So before the U-turn in September last year, the target was 2028, with a cap of £10,000 for landlords. And there were a number of exemptions, including high cost, all improvements being made, and there was one for external wall insulation in certain circumstances. And if there was a failure to comply, then the landlord could be fined thousands of pounds. But what does this mean in practice? So most properties in the private renter sector that are below a C, around 74%, actually need more than £10,000 to retrofit the property. And here are some of the most common improvements. And there are still some low-cost improvements that can be made, which cost maybe several £100s each. But solar panels would likely be one of the easiest solutions to comply under these standards. They're proven, there's relatively less disruption, and there's also a clear return on investment. But we also need to be careful of carbon intensive heating, such as gas boilers. It might even be worth extending the life of those assets a bit longer. So what do we know so far about the new regulations? So the deadline has been extended 2 years to 2030, but just announced recently, it would also include social housing, so around another 1.2 million properties. This could potentially be significant when thinking about the availability of the supply chain closer to the 2030 deadline. And we need to be aware of EPC changes as well that will make them more accurate, but potentially take longer and cost more. Changes will recommend and favour heat pumps more, maybe even see carbon intensive heating like boilers not prioritised. But we do know the direction of travel, and that's more renewables, insulation, and decarbonised heat. And there are considerations around the Renters Reform Bill. The health of the home is very much linked to energy efficiency. So with AWAB's law being extended into the private rented sector, there's going to be an increased focus on things like excess heat and cold, as well as mould risk. There's actually a lot of tech that has been developed for social housing that could translate it across to the private renter sector to help manage these risks. Now I'd like to introduce our lovely panel. So if Angharad, if you can give an overview of yourself, of Andrews, and maybe your initial thoughts around the energy efficiency standards.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Luke. So my name's Angharad Truman. I'm Group Lettings Director for Andrews Property Group. We manage several thousand properties across the south of the UK. We've got about 40 branches, and we've got various corporate clients that also extend to all parts of the UK as well. So we've got a wide breadth of property across the UK, and this is clearly going to be an issue for many letting agents and their landlords as we get closer to 2030. And for me, my initial thoughts are that this is actually more of a risk for landlords and for our private rental sector than the Renters' Rights Bill, because I think that with the Renters' Rights Bill, if you have a good managing agent and you have a good RLP policy, then as a landlord, you shouldn't really see any change. But I feel like MEES with the minimum rating of C is unavoidable. You will have to do something to get your property up to C. And there are several properties that will never reach that, that will never get anywhere near that. And I think this is a significant risk to the already declining, as we think, numbers of available properties that are out there.
Great, thanks, Angharad. Sam, do you want to give a brief intro to yourself, Crystal, and yeah, your thoughts as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Luke. Thanks for having me. So yes, my name's Sam. I'm the Business Development Manager at Crystal Specialist Finance covering the Midlands. And what Crystal are doing we are essentially a master broker within the specialist mortgage space, so assisting our mortgage brokers and other property professionals within the market sourcing specialist solutions when it comes to maybe different types of property, maybe a bit more short-term finance, and just anything outside of the norm or the high street lending, really. So yeah, I mean, my thoughts on the minimum energy efficiency standards. Look, they're absolutely, the changes are rooted with positivity for tenants. There's no doubt about that, but it's not going to come without its challenges for the landlords and properties owners throughout the market, whether that's going to be supply chain issues, whether it's going to be cost involved, there's all sorts, and time scales as well for that to be delivered. But undoubtedly, there comes opportunity as well. We're already starting to see, which I'm sure we'll touch on, are landlords that are looking to refurbish their properties to bring them up to a much better standard, because we know there's those out there that simply haven't been, and it is creating much sought after property for those landlords. So look, there's certainly opportunities out there for them to enhance what their properties look like within that market. And if there's anything that's high on a tenant's agenda, it's looking to decrease the amount that they've got outgoing each month. So if it means that they can create some property that's much more sought after and reducing some utility bills for them, there's plenty to be looked at. There's plenty of opportunity there to be able to do that.
Brilliant, thanks, Sam. And Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself as well and give your thoughts?
Good morning, and great to be part of this panel this morning. Yes, well, I'm Amanda, and mortgage product manager at MCube, or MPowered Mortgages. And it's interesting when you've got, from the lender's point of view, it's really been an interesting journey. If I roll back to, 2018, 2019, when I was at a different lender before MPowered, it was very much, our focus was on, what's happening, what can we do? And, it's interesting, going through that whole journey, back in 2019, there's 4 or 5 green mortgage products out there. Roll forward to now, there's over 60 different lending schemes. And I think it's really interesting to see, the minimum energy efficiency standard, developments that are there, is how we're going to embrace this as, as lenders, how are we going to take this forward, and how are we going to support, as it's already been mentioned, the biggest challenge here is going to be for landlords. And, for that vast amount of properties which aren't meeting C grade, how are we going to support, how are we going to help finance, and how are we going to achieve that? And I think it's all about collaboration. So it's great to be part of the panel today. I know we're going to cover lots of these areas off, so look forward to being part of this conversation.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Amanda. Like I said, we've got a really great panel here. I'd like to go on to sort of the first question, really, and really discussing the impact on the private rented sector. So how do you think this will actually change the dynamics within the market? So Angharad, would you like to sort of start off?
Yeah, I think the press are very quick to talk about a mass exodus of landlords, and I don't think we are seeing a mass exodus. I think we are seeing a changing demographic of landlords, and I think that means that what we're seeing is what we would traditionally call your hobby landlord, who may have had one or two properties and bought sort of in the early 2000s or 90s when property values were cheaper. They're the ones that are looking to get out because this was a pension, this wasn't a profession for them. And where the government is adding extra costs for these landlords, not just from EPC ratings, but from other elements that have come in over the last 15 years, I think those are the type of landlords that we are seeing exit, and they are putting their properties up for sale. But what we're also seeing then is the rise of more professional landlords. So the bigger landlords are getting bigger. We're getting corporate landlords entering the market. We're getting companies start to diversify and offer. John Lewis is a great example of a business that's looking to start to provide rental housing to tenants. So I think we're just seeing a change in landlord behaviour rather than a reduction in landlords completely. And I think something like this, which is going to have a cost for those hobby landlords, may be a further tip to them to start to think to get out of property.
Yeah, and I suppose those larger landlords have some economies of scale as well. Maybe they're in-house sort of retrofit coordinators, that sort of thing. Sam, what are you sort of seeing in terms of the specialist market? Are you seeing, more corporates, larger, portfolio, sort of like mortgages rather than sort of those individual hobby landlords?
Absolutely, yeah. So I can 100% agree. We're not seeing a mass exodus, but what we are seeing is a definite shift from maybe more the first-time landlords or the hobby landlords that had been, snapping up some property, actually opting for, maybe this isn't as profitable as I first thought, or maybe I'm not as financially equipped as I needed to be to bring my property up to the minimum standards now. So we are certainly seeing a shift of those perhaps selling up, and the more professional and portfolio landlord picking up more property. And we are seeing that in the way that we are seeing the portfolios come and doing larger portfolio lends to be able to, raise cash to be able to snap up maybe those properties that are now coming onto the market. And that's probably where we're actually seeing an uplift in our bridging as well. So from a short-term finance point of view, those smaller time landlords that are looking to exit, the landlords that are that bit more financially stable and can look to move that bit quicker and raise from their portfolio in the background, we are starting to be able to raise that cash via short term very, very quickly to enable them to do that, but also to raise them the additional to carry out any refurbishments to bring them up to the energy efficiency standards. So we're certainly seeing more of that at the moment, but by no means is it a mass exodus, as you said.
And Amanda, are you seeing any sort of market trends? And you mentioned green mortgages before. Are you seeing there's potential for a lot more products in the private rented buy-to-let space?
Absolutely, and I think you can almost see this timeline of involvement. When you go back to pre-COVID, when there was that initial focus on green lending, it was very much, if I dare use that term, greenwashing. It was a discount for A and B properties. But I think we can now see the involvement as the market evolves, and it's very much now about retrofit as well. There's even bridging retrofit. There's various products out there, and I think that's really what we need to be doing, is focusing on supporting, helping these landlords with the cost now, and not looking at just rewarding those who've already got their properties, which are ABs, but to see how can we do that. And especially now, when it's previously, looking at the E's and F's, now we've got to now focus and get them up to C's as well. And the various schemes, there's been some great schemes that have come out recently, but I think we're going to, on the cusp of seeing a whole new way and some real incentives and innovation to come out in the market to really incentivize. There's cashback schemes out there already, but I think there's a lot more we can do. Plus also carbon offsetting as well. There's those various bits to help as well, which will help bring up the properties, make them more desirable as well, because we've got more efficient property. It's going to be more desirable, it's going to attract more rent as well. So it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously there needs to be some incentives and some support for landlords to make it a fair policy. And I don't know if there's sort of almost like a regional aspect as well. So obviously, if you've got a fairly low value property I don't know, in the north of England, for example, 10 grand, 15 grand to upgrade that is a significant proportion of that value, whereas in London it might make more sense. It's a small proportion of that value, right? So there could be a regional side of things there. I'm going to sort of just stick with mortgages and yourself, Amanda. And do you see there being any issues around actually lending on inefficient properties in future? So could there be like a negative effect because of this regulation for landlords in terms of their mortgages?
There could well be, because obviously with booking and regulating how we're reporting on buy-to-let mortgages as well. There could be that impact. Our lenders going to, maybe not give those incentives for those long-standing on their books. There's those implications which still need to be kind of digested and taken forward as well. I think the overall aspect, though, is to support, especially of consumer duty on there as well, is supporting low, at the end of the day, there are customers, to support them to get the best for the property. It helps us as a lender as well, improving that overall stock. So I think there's going to be a lot of arms reached out, I believe, and looking at ways to support landlords. I think key thing as well is the educational piece as well, and that comes across the industry. It's great seeing, I know Santander, even though it's on with what they've launched this week, it's great to see the enhancements on their green hub as well. And there's lots which are being done by some of the key lenders out there supporting and giving that extra information out, and linking up with Proplo as well to give that support to our borrowers to support the improvements on this as well, and that overall knowledge base.
Brilliant. And Sam, did you have any sort of comments on that as well, in terms of like greener mortgages, or maybe the role of brokers in this as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's undoubtedly going to be an impact when it comes to looking at financing properties that simply aren't meeting those energy standards. I think one of the potential issues that we may come to see in the future is a decrease in property value, with the increased risk from the lender's side. But absolutely, I would say if you don't have a mortgage broker, get in touch with one. The role of the mortgage broker is absolutely to provide education in this space, and forward planning for the future. So it's a vital part when looking at financing your property, and sort of your business plan and your portfolio for the future is including that, and that should form part of mortgage brokers' advice going forward, really.
Brilliant. And sort of changing topics slightly, Angharad, it'd be really good to get your views on the timescales and we mentioned it before, the supply chain, particularly with now the inclusion of another 1.2 million social housing properties. How is that going to impact landlords actually getting retrofit and actually accessing an electrician, solar installer, installation providers, that sort of thing? Maybe sort of experience of other deadlines like that this market's faced.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it's great that this has been extended to the social housing sector as well, because we should be held to the same standards. So that's good, but that does provide an added pressure in terms of timescales. And I think what we need to be careful of is that landlords are taking action early on, that they are not waiting until the deadline, because there will be a proportion of landlords who've already taken action before it was scrapped by the Conservative government recently, and so they're sort of sitting at home probably now thinking, oh great, I'm already ahead. But there will be a significant chunk of landlords who haven't taken any action yet, and they are waiting to see what the detail is of this. And the issue that we risk is that we had a change to legislation back in 2020 when EICRs were made mandatory for rented property, and we saw massive backlogs across the country where we just couldn't get the electricians in to not only can complete the checks in the first place, but then to complete the remedial works that were needed from doing the EICRs. And what I worry about is that if we have too many landlords wait until that deadline, we will have a similar situation that we had when EICRs were introduced, that we might have the EPCs, we might have updated EPCs conducted, but we have no way of completing the upgrades needed because there's just not enough engineers out there. There's huge waiting lists and backlogs. So I think my advice for any landlord looking at this is to take action early, is to get ahead of this rather than waiting until the last minute.
And that's a good point, because the government will also say, well, we've given you 6 years, like 5-6 years to do this. So if you're, waiting till the last year and then you can't get a solar panel installer or, external wall installation, whatever you need to do, that excuse probably isn't going to cut it, and you probably could start to face fines. So that's a really good point. Sticking with you, Angharad, I'm interesting. It'd be good to talk about AWAB's law, because it feels relatively separate in terms of the regulations, but actually there is, I think, quite a big overlap, because AWAB's law does look at the health of the home. Is it, how cold is it? Is it, how hot is it during the summer? Is it like, how livable is it basically, including indoor air quality, like mold risk, and a lot of that is affected by energy efficiency. So what's your sort of view on that? Is this, are we taking it too siloed, or is there going to be a few more sort of joined up thinking here?
I think that this is a clear indication that there is joined up thinking going on in the government, and I think that they are very aware of the need to improve the condition of rented properties. And I think that means that AWAB's law and changes to minimum energy efficiency standards go hand in hand together. The government they have tried for a long time to encourage landlords to do this with housing health and rating system applying to private rental sector of homes fit for human habitation, which came in a few years ago. They've been trying to build up to this, and I think this is another step to say, look, landlords, you have to be aware of the condition of your properties and you have to take action quickly. So I very much think they go hand in hand, and I think it's going to be interesting how the changes to energy efficiency affect damp and mold in properties, because no longer is a landlord going to be able to go to court and say, oh, there's damp in there because the tenants just haven't opened a window. They're going to need to show evidence that they have consistently tried to educate tenants on how to stop damp and mold happening in their properties. And so I think energy efficiency, a better home that's better on an energy efficiency standard, is going to only benefit the tenant in that respect as well. So I definitely think they go hand in hand. And I think this is just further evidence of the government trying to move this agenda forward.
Yeah, and especially as I actually built a business on this and sold it over 4 years ago, where we have very cost-effective monitoring equipment out there, and that wasn't the only supplier, and you can then start to really disaggregate actually what is the cause of that mold and damp in the home, and a lot of the times, there was aspects of behaviour, but sometimes it actually was something structural related to the property, and it was just very easy just to blame the tenant. So I do see, potentially a lot of that technology starting to go into the, into the private rental sector for sure. So okay, so Sam, Amanda, do you have any sort of comments on that as well, in terms of like the sort of livability of the property, and potentially, because you guys lend against that that property, right? So do you think there's any risk there for lenders? So currently you're being sort of judged on reporting on your carbon emissions and the energy efficiency of your loan book, but what about sort of the livability in future? Do you think that's a potential risk there? Amanda, I'll come to you first.
That's a really interesting question, because obviously as part of the lending decision we have a valuation report, and that comes back, and is it a habitable property? And occasionally you do get properties that come back and are not, and you can tell, and it's interesting. So it'll be interesting to see whether these guidelines actually expand, because what is considered habitable and what's not, and this kind of goes off into the more of the area of evaluation report. That's kind of, but are we going to introduce stricter, especially at the moment we can bring this across maybe and get more details on that, actually bring it into lending policy? Maybe that's something for lenders to pick up, and especially on rental properties, is it going to have an impact? Have we therefore, of course, that ethical approach as well to lending as well? Does this property meet that as well? We should be making sure it's not just that commercial side, but we have that ethical stance as well. Do we need to start considering that? And I think that's something we do need to take on board, and to make sure that those properties being rented out are fit and ready to be consumed for consumers. I remember passing my back many moons ago, went to Village, but we had a report come in about a HMO which was on our books, which was not habitable at the time, and we did actually approach them and to do something about that, because it just they do occasionally happen, and we do as a lender hear about that, and we will reach out and go, well, it is we have that care of duty, and I think it's something which we do need to pick up. So whether this is going to expand further, I think it's something which we should take onto our radar, definitely, and bring that into our lending policies.
Brilliant. Yes, that's an interesting conversation there. Sam, I wondered, from a broker's perspective, how do you guys see your role as helping those landlords? What do you see the role of the broker in this whole energy efficiency side of things as?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just coming back to both their points, 100% agree. And in terms of perhaps valuations, down valuations, or simply being declined due to uninhabitability, with my solutions hat on from the broker side, it's not necessarily the end of the road either. There are further solutions and options there that can be considered, which, going back to your question, is the role of the broker. They need to be further educated in the specialist solution side, which is where we come in to provide that education to help them understand what alternative solutions there are there for them. So if they aren't meeting those energy standards, or it's not being reported on as habitable for the tenant, what is the alternative? How can we help them improve? How can we help them make some changes? And how can we help them therefore refinance that property? So there are alternatives there, and I'll continue to bang the drum about that, with our repeated loyal brokers. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I'm going to ask the same question to you, Angharad. So yeah, what do you see the role as letting agents in this area?
I think, first of all, whenever any specific guidance is published after the consultation, that letting agents take the time to familiarise themselves with what that is. And then I think letting agents should be supporting and guiding their landlords through this process. So that is regular communication, that is assisting them with advice and providing them with quotes and giving them access to great suppliers that will be able to help them with that. And I just think it's about letting agents just being consistent with their communication to landlords about this, because there are many letting agents that will bury their head in the sand, just that there are landlords. But I think you can really show your value as a letting agent if you can get ahead of this and start to advise your landlords correctly, and protect them from any fines, but because they haven't done it, by the deadline. So I think the year before last, I held an entire landlord seminar, which was just about changes to EPC ratings, and it was packed. It was full of landlords. Landlords want to know what to do, and we got some really great speakers in to give advice. And I think the more that we can do that as agents, I think the better, really, for the value of that agents, but also for our landlords and for the tenants who are living in those properties too.
So it's almost a differentiator as well. It's like you're providing added value to your customers, and not just lettings agents. I suppose that's across the board in terms of brokers and mortgage lenders as well, right? So just showing that added value. Amanda, again, same question, sort of role of mortgage lenders. You can talk about MPowered and maybe the wider market as well, if you want to. That.
Absolutely, it's absolutely vital that as a mortgage lender, us here at MPowered, we're constantly reviewing what we can do, how we can support as well. Even though our focus at the moment is on, is residential, we have, we do. I have lent on in buy-to-let space as well, and it's something which is always on our radar. But as always, as part of that is that conscientious decision making which we have, and it's the impact of those decisions and of our lending and how we lend as well. It's something which we take great importance on and great value on, and really make sure before we launch into any new area we know exactly the impacts of that and what is required, various regulations and all of that is all put together, as well as what can be actually a really good solution out there to actually help landlords as well, and to help in that section as well. So it's very much watch this space with MPowered. But I think, when you look wider as well, it's not just us. Other lenders are constantly, there's always people in product busy, working away to see, researching, understanding what's happening, but looking at various consumer studies as well to see what can be done, how can we impact, how can we actually help. The underlying ethos is always, how can we help someone to get into their property? How can we help landlords as well? We'll always, I think there's that overall feeling when I'm with, in seminars with other mortgage lenders as well. It's very much about how we can help, and we've got that duty of care as well with our lending, which I think is coming through more and more with products and propositions that are being launched. So they're very much taking on board, the latest MEES as well, and seeing what can be done and how we can support with the PRS as well.
And I've seen a few green mortgages, retrofit mortgages in particular, come out over the last few weeks and months. So one comes to mind is Virgin Money with a 15 grand cashback incentive, although that's over 10 years, being locked in for 10 years. There's a few others that are increasing the loan to income ratio. I think even like sort of 4.5, 5, 6 times even. So are you seeing, what sort of innovation are you seeing in the market? And are we seeing a ramp up in terms of the number of green mortgage products and the variety of them coming onto the market?
Absolutely. It's interesting when you look over the period of time. I think going back pre-COVID, there was a real buzz at that time, and unfortunately, there was a lot of development. We could see, that's where I think when Kensington first came out of their eco cashback as well, and you could see this was being picked up at that time by other lenders. However, COVID kind of put a bit of a stamper on that, didn't it, and halted what was happening. It's all kind of, so they were all off doing busy, sorting out what we could do and with that. But now that's kind of eased. We've come out of that. We've gone through, trust and all of that, and all the trust economics, and we kind of, we've still got that, but that's kind of a standard now. So now we can actually start to see, we've got this timeline ahead of us. What can we do? What innovations there? And have really been seeing a ramp of products coming out, and I'm sure, and kind of there's other products that will be coming to the forefront of the market shortly over the next, rest of this year and over 2025 as well. And it's really interesting to see it. It's not just about EPC. There's some great carbon offsetting schemes that are coming out as well. And it's really interesting, when you've got lenders out there, for example, like Gatehouse as well, who will actually carbon offset for the time you've got your lending with them, they'll offset against that. And there's those kind of incentives and initiatives which I think will start to see more come out into the market as well. So it's exciting times, and it's great to see that green lending has come back to the forefront. It really feels that way at the moment.
Yeah, carbon offsets is a really interesting point, actually, because I think it was HACT, which is the Housing Association's Charitable Trust, have been running a carbon credit scheme where I think they're probably getting per tonne of carbon about £100, sort of £50 to £100 per year over the next sort of 15, 17 years, which adds up, actually. So if you're saving a couple of tonnes per property over that time period, that does work out probably potentially thousands of pounds there. I think the difficulty is in terms of consumers and landlords, like essentially getting that up front. They might not want dribs and drabs of offsetting over 10 years, or let's say. They probably want something, maybe a lesser payment but up front, which they can then sort of facilitate the works with. So I'm going to go on to my final question. So really, I think it's about what's our ask for government. So how can we make this a really successful policy which is fair and balanced? So I'll probably start with you, Angharad. So what's your sort of maybe top one wish or top one ask that you think would make this policy more successful in the longer term?
Well, I have many. So to pick one.
Don't start with one then. If you've got a few, roll them off.
Okay, so I think initially, I would really like for the government to include landlords, agent groups in their consultation about this, because too often with rental policy, the government is guilty of listening to one proportion of the population that makes up landlords and tenants, and not also talking to landlords about the impact it will have for them. So my first wish is that they will take into account some of the views from landlords. My second wish is that then any decisions that are made are clearly communicated with clarity very early on, so that landlords can start to plan, they can start to understand straight away what is going to be expected of them. I think there's still massive questions about, you know, exemptions, about listed buildings. I think we need to know about this so that we can start to make steps to do these improvements. So definitely clarity. And then I think there needs to be some detail on the funding for landlords. You know, the government have committed 6.6 billion to do this. Well, what does that funding look like? Is that going to be in the form of grants? Is it, you know, is it going to be in the form of, could it even be to do with tax cuts for landlords who do these changes early on? Like, what does that look like? And how are we going to communicate that to landlords? Because as long as landlords know what they're in for and they know what they can perhaps get monetary wise to help them, then I think we will continue to keep them in the sector. But as soon as there's uncertainty, that's when they're going to start to go, right, I'm out. So yeah, early on we need this communicated.
And that's what government is there really to provide, is stability. So the more stable, you know, the economy is and the political environment, you know, businesses can get on and create growth, right? So that's interesting. You mentioned the tax piece. That is really interesting, because essentially at the moment, landlords can benefit from tax advantages, but some of it might be claimed under wear and tear, but not many. Or it would be off capital gains. So, and that would be like when they sell it, right? So not up front. But obviously with Labour potentially bringing in increased capital gains tax, that's another completely other argument. I'm just wondering if there could be a linkage there between, you know, if they are making some upgrades, you know, can they actually maybe get a lower, you know, capital gains tax? I think there could be some quite like innovative thinking here, which doesn't cost the Treasury like huge amounts. Great, thanks for that. Sam, what's your sort of thoughts then?
I 100% agree. I think clear guidance, just some clear and consistent guidance that can be, you know, shared amongst mortgage brokers and landlords, because there is a real emphasis here on that education piece and mortgage brokers being able to advise appropriately when it comes to, you know, these energy standards. So the clearer it can be, the more involved they can be during that consultation period. It's only going to be positive for all sides. I mean, timescales are a big one. We are naturally going to see, you know, those that do stick their head in the sand and don't take action early enough, and it's only going to create a bottleneck towards potentially 2030. So I think, you know, taking timescales into consideration and potentially extending those by, you know, keeping an eye on supply chains and how that's actually working out as we move towards those deadlines is really, really important.
Yeah, so I think there is something around flexibility as well. If, you know, there's literally not the supply chain there and it's like a year out, and there has been a decent amount of upgrades, you know, is there flexibility to extend that? So great. And Amanda, what's your sort of ask or asks to sort of make this policy, as you know, a success?
I think what's key with it is, as you know, it's been mentioned already, is the clarity up front. So just so we know exactly, everyone in the whole chain knows what's going to be required, what's expected. And I think a key thing is non-compliance as well. What are going to be the consequences? What's going to be, you know, how is this going to be monitored? How is it going to be enforced as well? And what potentially could happen as well? Because we'd need to know as well, especially for lenders, could this then be a property? Is this, you know, the impacts of that's going to have impacts for us as well. So that's really crucial as well. And also, do we need to also look at enforcing any of those as well ourselves to make sure that, you know, if we've got any properties on the book which are now going to fall out of that, does that mean they're not going to be, you know, impact their saleability, various things like that. So it's going to be absolutely crucial that we know exactly what to expect, have it really clearly laid out so we can know exactly, so we can all plan accordingly, really, and good and collaboration across all. I think that's absolutely key. It's been lovely on this today, hearing, you know, from different sectors as well, and how we can collaborate and work closer together. I think that's going to be absolutely key for the success.
For sure, and I think that there is clarity that's definitely needed. But as I mentioned in my slide, my slides, my overview, we do know the direction of travel, and that is around more renewables, more insulation where that's applicable, and there are exemptions for external wall insulation potentially, and decarbonising heat. And I think it might be that there is a phasing of a lot of these works. So it's not necessarily you get all the works done and then suddenly you'll see. Maybe you just get a few of the low-hanging fruit, easy, quick wins done first. And also, I think there's an awareness side of things for landlords, because there is funding out there at the moment. So we've had a lot of interest from landlords which maybe have tenants on benefits, and they can actually apply for EK4 funding to get it either most or all of the works completed for them. So yeah, so I do think there is some low-hanging fruit for sure. But yeah, the more clarity we can get, the more detail we can get earlier from government, I think the better it's going to be. Great, I think that's nearly our time as well. I just want to say thank you to Angharad, Sam and Amanda for sparing your time. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and take care. Okay. Brilliant.
Thanks very much, Luke. Cheers.
Thanks again, guys. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.